Hey everyone, welcome to Decision Desk HQ's Let Me Finish. I'm Liberty Vittert, Professor of Data Science and Senior Data Scientist at Decision Desk HQ. I'm joined here by our esteemed panel. We have Catherine Swartz, a reporter for Notice, and Kirk Beto, editor for Hotline. So there really is only one major story today, the VP pick for Kamala Harris, our potential next vice president of the United States for the Democratic Party. So I think I just have to throw this out here. Kirk, was he the right or the wrong pick?
Here, I thought we were going to talk about all the primaries today here. The only big news in my world right now, voters are voting in Kansas. What more do we want here? I think Walz was a surprising pick. I think it was surprising that he first got mentioned, then he made the finalists, and then he eventually made the pick. He was earlier last week, he was kind of like a dark horse pick, I guess you could say. But really, I think he emerged in the final few days here from the reporting that we've seen as an effective messenger, a good partner for Harris, and someone whose personal ambition might outshine the name at the top of the ticket. And I think those might have been the concerns with Shapiro. But I'm really enjoying everybody discovering who Tim Walz is right now. I've enjoyed covering him since he was a guy in the House. His first gubernatorial run in 2018 was great. And he's been the current DGA chair, and he's been fun to talk to there. So I'm looking forward to the rest of the country introducing themselves to Tim Walz over the next few weeks here.
Yeah, and just to jump on that, I mean, I think from the outset, Walz especially looks like there may be people wondering, who is this? He does not have the same name recognition nationally that other candidates have. Polls are showing that, the polling that's been done. But what he does bring to the table, like Kirk mentions, is years and years of experience, not just in the governor's office, that executive experience so crucial to the ticket here, but also, 6 terms as a congressman. So knowing and navigating these kind of federal systems, especially with some of the progressive policy points that he has that are in line with VP Harris, he's bringing something to the table there that someone like Governor Shapiro wouldn't necessarily be bringing from day one. So to me, from the outset, this is really looking like a choice of a governing partner more than just an electability standpoint alone.
Do you agree with Trump that he was the worst vice presidential pick in history? And that he'll, what was it? He'll take the country to hell. That was Trump's response this morning to this. Any truth?
I don't know. You look at what they've done. It's not unsmart. Walz, he looks like he's from a red state. He talks or sounds like he's red, but he's one of the more progressive. Look, all they had to do was show the streets of Minneapolis during the 2020 riots. They're leaving themselves open to some serious attacks, especially considering how far to the left and how progressive Kamala Harris is. I don't think he was a pick that's bringing her back to the center. Like Shapiro would have been a much more centering candidate in that sense. It feels like they're kind of leaning in, except for the way he looks, which maybe that's all that matters. They're leaning into the progressive aspect of this, which I don't know if that's necessarily the best, at least from an electoral college map standpoint. I'm not sure that was the best choice.
Yeah, I think that's the big question here. And, Catherine, you cover the Pennsylvania delegation real closely for Notice there. Tim Walz might look like an off-duty mall Santa here, but I don't know exactly if that's going to necessarily deliver Pennsylvania, Wisconsin, or Michigan like Shapiro might have been able to. Do you know exactly or what your reporting says about what happened with Shapiro here? Because it seemed like he was the leader in the clubhouse. And to Liberty's point, it seems like he would have been able to beef her up a little bit in those Rust Belt states that she needs to win.
Yeah, well, when it comes to Shapiro, the top line is that he is a vastly popular candidate in Pennsylvania and is a popular governor, about a 61% approval rating right now. He has brought Republicans, independent centrists into the fold. And he's been doing that, to point out, all the way back to his time in the state legislature. Montgomery County, we think of, it's this crucial area outside of Philadelphia and the suburbs there. But back when he was running for the state legislature, that was a Republican seat. And we've seen this pattern throughout Shapiro's career, 2 runs as attorney general where he is vastly outperforming the other national candidates, the state candidates. He first won in 2016 when Trump won in Pennsylvania. 2020, the elected attorney general by 300,000 votes compared to Biden's 80,000. So it's clear that Shapiro had that appeal within the state, that more centrist message, like you were saying. But I think what the bigger question is looking at the national data, looking at past elections, does a VP candidate actually make a difference what state they're coming from? So the people in Pennsylvania that were really gunning for Shapiro that I talked to, that's elected officials, county chairs, activists, and just voters who were aware of him and know Shapiro and love Shapiro, they're saying, hey, we wanted all the help we could get for Pennsylvania when it comes to Shapiro. But, looking at the data, it's not so clear that there is a clear indicator that Shapiro would have made the ultimate difference when it is Harris at the top of the ticket.
Don't you guys think, though, at some point we have to bring up the elephant in the room about why Shapiro wasn't picked and why Kamala? I mean, he was clearly the favorite, and then it was a switch at the end to Walz, which, by the way, the betting markets, picked up on, and they're never wrong. So clearly they went with Walz. But I mean, he's Jewish, and there was a huge push in the base of the Democratic Party and the progressive base to say no Jew, especially the pro-Hamas side of this. So, Michigan would have been up, the Dearborn, there was already a huge movement saying, I think it was called No Jew Shapiro or whatever it was, No Jew Josh, saying that would have an effect, not necessarily in people who are going to move over and vote for Trump, but just lack of voter turnout, especially in some of those Rust Belt states, that would have been a problem. And even the arrogance factor of it, he's being compared as the Barack Obama of the new Barack Obama in terms of his oratory skills, in terms of sort of star power. And he was already, she's not being called the next Barack Obama. So, it's really sort of his star power could have overtaken her. And that could have been, that sort of giving in to the far left, and the fact that he really could outshine her could have had a huge effect on why she sort of moved to this dark horse of Walz.
I think it has a little bit more to do with that personal ambition than anti-Semitism right now, at least from the reporting that I've seen. We did see a lot of that concerted movement from some of the progressives, especially when it was his reaction to Israel's war in Gaza. But it seems like it was more about meshing together with personality-wise, and also from a perspective of what's his personal ambition here right now. Well, Walz is not as old as Trump or Biden, but he's definitely a lot more advanced in his career than Shapiro is right now. Catherine mentioned this. Shapiro outran the top of the ticket in 2022. We got to also remember here that he might have run against one of the worst statewide nominees on the Republican side in the midterms as well. Not trying to take away his victory. A plurality of votes is a win. A win's a win, a win. But he was also not necessarily running against a political mastermind here as well. Walz's team is a lot more accomplished, has a lot less to prove, and maybe his hair is brushing up against the ceiling of his career, as opposed to Shapiro, who is getting these comparisons to Barack Obama, like you said, Liberty, who has not yet scratched his full potential yet, and is still young enough to have a bigger future, maybe run for another statewide office one day. I mean, he's only had less than 2 years in that office already, could still run for president one day, might have outshined the top of the ticket. And I think those concerns might have outweighed any sort of anti-Semitism with Shapiro.
Yeah, when it comes to Walz, I mean, by the end of a term, if Harris is elected president, he'll be 68. So, still not as old, but I think there's some wariness on the Democratic side in particular of having another, let's say, more senior candidate running in the future. But that's certainly not the case with Shapiro. But, just on that front of the issue of Israel and where he stands, I think it's important to point out that when we were looking not just at Walz, but more at the long list of candidates, Mark Kelly, Andy Bashir, others that were in consideration for office, Shapiro's stance isn't so wildly different from the others when it comes to Israel. He's been critical of Netanyahu's government. He has supported Israel, though, and that has been clear. But he's been the one that had to directly confront it the most, given that he has the University of Pennsylvania and he had called on encampments to stop. So my argument there, and the argument that I hear from Shapiro backers, particularly Pennsylvania Democrats, is really, hey, it's not that his stance was so different. It's just that he was forced to confront it more directly as governor compared to some of these other states. But what I hear over and over again about Shapiro from Democrats and Republicans in Pennsylvania is they cite that he's a man of faith as a strength. That's a good thing. They even people of different faiths that see him, they see the way that his Jewish faith has guided his life and principles. They see that as a strength. So I know it's not Shapiro here, it's Walz. That's the focus of today. But just when it comes to that, I think there's a little bit more nuance to that issue of Israel and how it would have affected his VP chances.
What about how this affects the Trump campaign? I mean, I sort of feel like Shapiro could have kind of wiped the floor with Vance in any type of debate. I don't know about Walz. Like, what do you guys think about what's going on with that? Like, how's he going to stack up against Vance?
Walz is an incredibly effective communicator. And I think one of the things that kind of catapulted into this pole position in the whole VP race was, he might not have been the first one to start calling the Trump campaign weird, to call JD Vance weird, but he certainly popularized it when he did a cable news hit about a week and a half ago. And you can see the ramifications with that, not just in the Harris campaign, who's adopted the weird messaging, but Democrats all over the country are now adopting the same, like, very plain spoken language, very much. Look, it's a lot different from the Biden campaign, which was very highfalutin, I guess is the phrase for it, with they're talking about Trump in terms of existential threats to democracy. Bigger things are at stake here than just what's in front of us in this election. Meanwhile, Walz is in and just goes, yeah, they're weird. Yeah, they're strange. Like, you don't want to hang out with those guys. You don't want to have a hot dish with them. And I think that's going to be one of his biggest strengths over Vance. I mean, we've seen the Vance really stumble out of the gate here ever since he was announced as VP 2 weeks ago. I mean, just pause for a second and think about that. The RNC was just like 2 weeks ago here right now. We've lived 5 political lifetimes since then. But we've seen him not be able to really communicate, not be an effective surrogate for Trump, much less an effective surrogate for himself. And I think you're going to see Walz really take it directly to Vance here right now. But Catherine, to your point, how much do vice presidential picks really matter? I think I side with Trump here, where you're voting for the top name at the top of the ticket, not the one underneath.
It really is with both of these VP candidates now. It's a story of 2 biographies, right? So JD Vance propelled onto the national stage because of his story, because of Hillbilly Elegy, and rode that through in his Senate run. This has been central to his identity, but as Kirk mentioned, we saw him struggle a bit to convey that message during his national time at the RNC, that opening speech. So I think what people are looking for from Vance, the conversations I'm hearing, especially on the Republican side, about, okay, how well is he going to do in Wisconsin, in Michigan, and Pennsylvania? It's about how well can he convey his own personal story in a more intimate setting. And I think it's exactly the same for Walz. I was talking earlier today with Dr. Cassandra Conover. She's a county chair in Nash County, North Carolina. She's known Kamala Harris since 2006. They were both Black woman DAs at the same time. So they go back, and she's really excited about Walz here because she sees something similar in Walz as Biden, which is that in her rural area, these Democrats who are not just going to vote for someone because they have a D behind their name, they need to be convinced. Walz is someone that in a one-on-one setting or in a group setting, you feel like this is a guy that he's got some humanity. It's a personal story. He talks about his daughters. He talks about his rural upbringing. He talks about his time as a teacher, as a football coach. These are all things that people can look at him, point to him and say, hey, I relate to you. I understand you, whether it's at a rally or in a more intimate level. So to me, it's really a matter with both of these VP candidates of how can they support the top of the ticket, but really how can they tell their own story?
I think that's an awesome point, is that, in some ways, Walz is sort of a more authentic JD Vance. Like, he comes from the Rust Belt, he's rural upbringing, like he's the more authentic side of this. And I think it'll be We will have a lot to talk about in the coming weeks about this story. So on that note, that is all for DDHQ, Decision Desk HQ's Let Me Finish for today. We will be back on Friday with a new episode. And until then, for all your election and polling needs and updates and information, please go to decisiondeskhq.com. And that is all for today from our panel, Catherine Swartz, reporter for Notice, and Kirk Beto, editor of Hotline, and me, Liberty Vittert, professor and senior data scientist at Decision Desk HQ. Thank you all so much for watching, and until next time.
Thanks, Liberty.